welcome to another episode of The Frontline. I'm Dr. Gary Payenda, and today I've got a good one for you. I'm going to be speaking with Rob Campbell about a new organization he's created that seeks to preserve and build up public health care in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So without further ado, I'll get him on the screen here. Hello, Rob, and thank you for joining me.
Hi, Gary. It's great to be with you. You're a kind of a beacon for those of us in Kaitiaki Hauora. So great to be sharing with you.
Yeah, I don't know about a beacon, maybe a small candle, trying to point out some things in the darkness. These have been a couple dark years in terms of the return of neoliberal politics into ascension and ascendancy and dominance in New Zealand. But before we talk about anything related to healthcare, anything else, can you give us a little bit of an idea about your background? You've done many things in your life. Which ones are you willing to talk about? What would you sell yourself as? Please.
Oh, crikey. Look, I've been around a long time. I'm a bit of a survivor, I guess, Gary. So, trained as an economist. I worked as a trade unionist. Then I worked again as an economist. Then I got involved in governance in public and then private companies. So I've seen pretty much, a lot of how Aotearoa has worked and a lot of the things that are wrong with it. But perhaps the unique thing I bring from a left perspective is that I have experience in the heart of the beast, if you like, both public and private sector. So I know a bit more about how it works than perhaps a lot of people out there who know things aren't going right, and they're right that they're not going right. But maybe I can have some better understanding of why that's so.
And you and your colleagues decided there was a need for another organization in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about Kaitiaki Hauora,
Yeah,
Guardians of Health, or Together for Public Health? Can you give
yeah,
us an idea of what it is and why we need it?
yeah, love to. And does New Zealand need more organisations? Almost certainly no. So we reluctantly overcame that. We're great at forming things. A number of us, Bill Rosenberg particularly, and I, were involved with a group organised of clinicians who were concerned about the contracting out of public hospital services to private hospitals. And we, as economists, basically got involved with that and supporting that group in their arguments. And there was an article in New Zealand Medical Journal and all that sort of stuff. When we came out of that, we thought, there's a lot of people concerned about what's happening with our health services in New Zealand, and each bit is probably talking its own part of it. Maybe we could try and pull together something that expressed some very simple principles, which were having a strong public system's really important. Secondly, recognizing equity as a key component of health is important, and in particular, equity in Te Tiriti terms. And thirdly, that just having a public system wasn't on itself the answer. You needed to have a wide view about what a public system was so that you could incorporate community, iwi Māori, and other perspectives into a public system. So they were the things that we were concerned about. We went out to a number of groups, employment groups, unions, professional organisations and others, and found there were a lot of people that did think just that. So we're not trying to stamp on anyone else's ground. We're just trying to espouse those basic principles about to have a good health system. You've got to start with what's healthy. You've got to start with a public system because it's a public issue. It's a common issue we all share. And equity and Te Tiriti are totally the core of that. So we're finding we're getting a lot of support. We're going to build it. We're going to try and create that as an issue during election year. And so far, I think we've got underway all right.
So that's a pretty ambitious task you set for yourself. So you're looking out for the well-being of patients. You're concerned about Te Tiriti and Maori health. Have you can you spare a moment for the CEOs of the private equity companies in Australia and internationally whose profits you might be affecting with your organization? So, did you seek to speak to the private healthcare organizations that are absolutely profiting handsomely from the latest round of healthcare privatization?
Yeah, look, it's a great irony, isn't it, that you can have a system that is clearly starved of funding, but people are making a lot of money in it, and they are. So yes, did we reach out to those organisations initially? No, but I know the people, some of the people involved. I've talked to both the charitable parts of that private sector and the private equity parts of the sector. In the last couple of weeks, I've talked to two of the major leaders in that sector. And you know, an interesting thing, Gary, is they obviously don't agree with me about the dangers of excessive profit being made from healthcare. But even they recognise to have anything that remotely resembles a good health system in which they can participate, I'm talking about their view, it requires a stronger public health system than we currently have. If you weaken the public health system, you welcome you weaken, sorry, the opportunities for private provision as well. And uh, you know, I'm not concerned about protecting their interests. I think they're exploiting a situation that they find. But for the people who are, for example, a GP running a business or uh, a a midwife having a small operation or a community trust or other people who are doing things that are not strictly speaking in the public service, all of those depend on a strong public sector core. And you know, I think we need to recognise that. So yeah, I'm not concerned about whether those guys. I mean, if they all decide this campaign's going to drive us out of business, I'm quite happy about that option. I hope that the people who have just spent several hundred million buying one of the PHOs find that it's not profitable for them.
Mm. Um, I will sometimes hear from just the person on the street, what is wrong with uh, private hospitals, private healthcare? Um, I'm going to go for my hip replacement. It's going to be done in private. What is wrong with that? What is your response?
Well, for the individual, completely understandable, and they're not necessarily wrong. And in the same way, I completely understand why some iwi are making arrangements with private providers because in the immediate term, that is going to provide to their people some care that they would not, some service that they would not otherwise get. But in the longer term, that is weakening the core public service, which provides for everyone, which provides the training, which provides the infrastructure, which provides the controls and data and principles, which provides the regulatory structure under which we all need to work in the health system. And eventually that is weakened. We have not found that right balance. We've tipped over from that to a situation where private investors are able to profit from a system which doesn't have adequate funding. It seems impossible that that would be the case, but it demonstrably is the case. So the individual, I understand why they're making that decision. It's not necessarily wrong for them as an individual, but for the community, it is weakening the core.
That's the same message I give to people who raise that issue, who say, I'm getting my hip replacement or my knee done in a month or two in private. What's wrong with that? Nothing is wrong with that for you, as you just said. But the next time you come into the public sector for an emergency or ICU care or an ED visit or surgery, uh, the funding that would have treated you in the public sector is gone. Those hundreds of millions have been redeployed. Those are taxpayer dollars that we're talking about that are
Mm.
redeployed in the private sector. And a very simple thing that people can understand, not a lot of words to explain it, simple concept. Good friend of mine has been in public his entire life, right? 30 years of his career, just decided to apply to work in private, is cutting down his public hours and in order to do his private work in private, because it's not that he is intellectually attracted to profiteering and the for-profit system, but he sees that as where the money and the work is going, and it has this corrosive effect of pulling some of our great nurses and doctors out of the public system into the private,
Yeah,
following the taxpayer dollars, and that those people and that money never comes back in the system. I want people to get clear on that.
yeah, absolutely, Gary. It disappears and it doesn't come back. And again, I don't blame those people because we have reached the stage in our healthcare system where a lot of the innovation, a lot of the good things that have been done, a lot of the new things that are being done outside of the public sector because the public sector isn't being promoted and protected in the way that it should be. You know, if you go back to 1938, when the social security system was largely introduced, there was a big fight then as to whether doctors, GPs, should be included in the state system. And in those days it was the British Medical Association in the old colonial days, not neo-colonial, the old colonial days, that fought that. And it was kind of understandable at the time that the primary sector would be left that way. But as things have emerged, as technology's changed, as demography's changed, as times have changed, we've now ended up with that private sector eating more and more into the public sector, so that more and more contracting out goes on. You know, I've got some good mates who are involved with medical laboratories, for example, you know, and now the private medical laboratories within the public system, and more, where there are opportunities, private opportunities are being taken. And we're not protecting our core public system in the way that we should be. So again, I've got good mates. I don't have medical insurance myself, but I've got good mates that have medical insurance. I've got good people I know that work in medical insurance organisations. They're quite well motivated, but they really don't understand that every step they take is weakening the core ability to provide something which is common to us all, which is a public health service. And we've kind of lost track of that. We're treating health as if it was something you can buy and sell. And once you've accepted that health is something that can be bought and sold, you are heading down that track. We've gone a long way down that track, and reversing is going to be very hard.
I think we've got the situation where CEOs are running the government, running healthcare, business is the paradigm, and that ends up being very reductive, where healthcare is just dollars and cents. And it looks as if we've got a government that wants to lower expenditures as much as possible, not realizing that you can lower costs too much and end up costing yourself more in the long run. So once we lose these doctors from the public sector, it's going to be extremely hard to get them back in. Once we change the system over to a privatized one, there will be a lot of people who still need things the private sector is unwilling or unable to provide, like intensive care, critical care of all kinds, emergency care, and of course, complex patient care. Now, a minute ago, you said you didn't have private health insurance, but I want to point out for people like myself who are 50 or older, or anyone who has a pre-existing medical condition, it becomes incredibly expensive to afford private health care. And the reality of it is that anyone remotely approaching pension age is going to be hard pressed unless they're quite wealthy to afford private health care, because private insurance is about essentially providing the least care while taking in the most premiums. That's how you make profits. And so I think among people 50 and older, there is an appreciation. If we stuff this up, there won't be a public hospital sector to count on. Do you have fears about that? Do you think we are? Is it any worse than it has been in the past 20 years, Rob?
Yeah, look, I think it is getting worse for a couple of reasons. One is the demography is getting worse because there are more of us getting older, and generally speaking, as you get older, your healthcare needs do increase. Secondly, the costs that we associated with reasonable medical care do change as society changes, and costs of medical care are going up all around the world. Doesn't matter whether you're paying for it publicly or privately, the costs are going up. And so as you weaken your core public system, the core public system can't spread those costs in the way it could if it was a complete public system. It ends up concentrating them and becoming more costly per activity, be it an operation or aged care or whatever it happens to be. So the economics of it are remorseless. It keeps getting worse for the public sector. That creates more opportunities for the private sector, and that spiral increases. It doesn't mean people don't have to do anything deliberately bad for these things to spiral out of control. Once you have a system which treats healthcare as a commodity which can be bought and sold, that's what we've entered into. And so, yes, it is getting worse.
Let me ask you this, Rob. It's a question about efficiency because often you'll hear, "Oh, but the private sector is so much more efficient than the lazy, inefficient public sector. Private is where it's at. They can fly through cases." Now, my real life experience tells me that's not true. Uh, Private sector is efficient because they cherry pick cases. They only take the easiest, simplest, quickest ones and avoid anything that smells of complexity. And of course, as soon as a complication happens, the patient gets whisked back into the public hospital for care. So there are some issues about efficiency. What are some of the downsides to having a big private sector in terms of education of, let's say, trainees, or just the loss of money into profits, because obviously that's money that doesn't come back into the system. Is how much of a factor do you think that is?
Look, I think it's a very important thing. Part of it is the money that we lose, and I don't downplay that. You raise it, and I've raised it, and it's real. Some money in a private operated system disappears out of the health sector, and we don't see it back, particularly if it goes offshore to investors. But the
Mm,
bigger thing that worries me, in a way, that's important. But the bigger thing that worries me is that it drains capability, and
mm,
capability gets lost out of the public sector into the private sector. It gets sliced and diced and transferred in different ways, and so we don't have the ability to maintain efficiency, which is important, obviously, and effectiveness, which is equally important. And so it's a downward spiral that the public system gets caught in. It may seem in the short term that contracting out some operations, for example, to the private sector is cheaper. I've got a question about that, whether that's really true or not, but let's just assume for the moment that it is. It may be in terms of the immediate cost, but what you're doing is you're increasing the cost of the public sector for doing these things, because as you lower it, to the extent that there are economies of scale and economies of scope in medical care, and there are some in some aspects of it, you're weakening the public sector just from a purely economic point of view. It's a transfer of value from the public to the private that is going on in terms of capabilities rather than necessarily dollars that you can see happening. So you can be transferring something. It looks like it's cheaper, but in fact, in the longer term, it's not. And the private sector doesn't carry the costs of the training and the placements and the regulation and the difficult case. You end up with all the difficult cases. Which business would you rather be in? Would you rather be in the business that is providing the simple cases and making a margin on them, or the difficult cases where there may be no margin at all over the cost of providing the service? In fact, there'll almost inevitably be a negative margin. But that's what, as a community, that's what we want. And we've got to remember, Gary, the key thing here is at the end of the day, we are a community. We are not simply consumers of individual health services. We're a community. We're whānau. We're part of a collective group that's bigger than ourselves. What we're doing is creating a health system where we are being treated as individuals for whom health is a transaction. And if you do that, the public system will always lose. It will never be better at that than the private sector is. That's their game.
And by the time we realize what's happened, this Wild West era of healthcare privatization and profiteering will have moved on. So I think there'll be this rapacious growth right now, where you even in small towns, the number of private radiology corporations, corporate entities, franchises that are opening up is quite astonishing. This is a growth industry. Telehealth, owned by, again, Australian private companies. Um, uh, Anytime you see private equity getting involved to buy out healthcare, you know that there's the hope of big profits in this. And you have to really ask yourself, in the even the medium term, like, what is that going to cost us? What does it look like when we're more mature in 10 years and we've got a two-tiered system of decrepit public hospitals and private hospitals, essentially for the wealthy or the very wealthy at that point? That's certainly not the country I want to live in. It's probably not the country that people in your organization want to live in either.
Very few of us would choose to live in that society. Let me put my economist's hat on for a minute. Just imagine you've got a system which is a public health system, which is basically trying to break even on what it does. It costs what it costs to provide the services. You
Mm.
decide that some of those services will be contracted out to people who want to make a profit out of it, and individual businesses will obviously try and make a profit out of it. When you take those bits of it out, they will try and do the things that enable them to make a profit. That's what businesses do. As you do that, the arithmetic tells you that the public system will get worse and worse off. It can't possibly do anything else. As you take out of it the bits that you can make a profit of, and we know there are some because people are making profits off them, as you do that, you will inevitably mean that what is left in the public system is finding it harder and harder to break even. The arithmetic, it's just arithmetic. It's not even economics, it's just arithmetic. And yet that's what we're allowing to happen. It doesn't make any sense, Gary. We're
There's another
deliberately
term for
choosing.
that, Rob, and that term is cream skimming. When corporations are allowed to skim the cream off the surface, we are left with the dregs,
Yeah,
and that's the
there's a
public. Um,
Gary, there's a great example right in the heart of our public hospitals with the private medical laboratories that have been able to take on that work, including, incidentally, one of them, Awanui, where a major investor is our own government super fund. But what we
mm,
find is that having decided to allow those things to be privatized, why on earth would you allow the scientific piece of medical care to be contracted out? Anyway, we did. And now we find that they are low payers, they are bad service providers, and
yeah.
who suffers from that? Who suffers from that is the public system. The public system that allowed them to go, that contracted them out, ends up struggling to meet its needs. And it's a great example. Medical laboratories are a great example of this. They're only one, but there are different ways to look at it from different parts of the medical system. But they're a great example. And we have our own government super fund investing in the exploitation of our own health system. How crazy is that? You've really got to stand back and think about what it is we are trying to do.
And in many cases, we're handing over monopoly power to industries, and it just doesn't. It's almost the opposite of what a wise sort of governance system would do, where it would seek to retain control over the really essential core functions of life, right? Utilities, electricity companies, the food you eat, and instead that was almost the first thing that we have surrendered to monopolies, duopolies, and the like. I don't know where this is going to end, but it hasn't ended well in any international comparator that I can think of. It, the race for profits over people is always a race to the bottom, and I feel like we're seeing that in healthcare more than ever right now.
Yeah.
So going back to your organization, can you give me an idea of what you hope to? What does victory look like for Kaitiaki Hauora?
What
What does success look like? What is a win for you?
yeah, can we talk win rather than victory? Because we're not unrealistic people. Uh,
True.
a win is if we can get a government elected at the end of this year, which genuinely places public health and public ownership and operation and funding of health at the core of the system rather than accepting that it's a declining part of the system. That's some of my fellows would go even further than that, but to me, that's the basic kind of step that we need to achieve.
And
And I'm
I would
hopeful. I'm hopeful we'll
take
do that.
great
I mean,
pains to say that regardless of the party that government or parties that comprise that government, you would hope that regardless of who wins, that they would want to champion a strong public health sector, and it's to at least to be able to brag about it and say, look at what we did. We
yeah,
preserved people's care, patients' care over competing interests, profits, or,
yeah.
or what have you, an aging population, all of the challenges. So I mean, it could really be a hugely successful pivot for any government to be able to say we're backing the public healthcare sector because it's the right thing to do. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean,
It should be in everyone's interests, and I probably go a bit further than some of my colleagues do, and say that some private operators, not if they're monopoly private operators extracting major profits from the system, but if they're a normal local GP or private provider that works in with the community and is part of it, the local pharmacists and all those people who are part of what makes up our communities, those people can exist within a strong public system, and we want them to exist within that. But we don't want people who are extracting, as you say, monopoly profits. As an economist, I would say rents out of that system. And we've got that happening at the moment, and we have to turn that around. And the only way we can do that is by strengthening the public system. There's no other answer to that. We can't just do it by hoping for it. And I do think, I don't see any reason why someone who is, for example, to be party political, a New Zealand First voter, or even a National Party voter shouldn't be able to vote for that. There might be some ideologues that can't vote for it, but I don't see why most people can't see that a really strong public sector is in all of our interests. The only people who really benefit from anything else are people who are looking to extract monopoly rents from the system.
and if people are interested in reading more about this, I think this is a good basic article. September 2025 in The Conversation, New Zealand's shift to more private healthcare will likely raise costs and reduce quality. What the evidence tells us. We have literally a couple generations worth of data talking about the limits to private for-profit healthcare. And I think it would be good for all of us to read an article like this to understand that the thing you're hearing in the media isn't actually backed up by evidence, and that private healthcare is often more constrained than you might think. Than you might think. Um, what's next for Kaitiaki Hauora? What is the next thing you all will be doing in the 38 weeks till the election?
Yeah, this is really boring, man, but we need to raise some money. We have started off this exercise with nothing. Some of us have put some money into it to try and make things go, but to be really effective, we need to raise some money. So we will be issuing calls for money. We haven't started yet, but we will. And
I was gonna say
we,
I didn't see on any of your I didn't see that on any of your work. But all right, we can hopefully put out the call to our viewers to say this is a thing worth fighting for. But
Yeah,
carry on. Sorry, go ahead.
so we will be issuing calls for support because these things do cost money. We're
Yep.
asking our constituent organisations, which are growing day by day, and individuals who express interest to join us in expressing their views about this. And this, I really want to emphasize this. You can have a whole variety of views about many of the political issues of the day and still agree that having a strong public health system is something that is really important to our communities and which we all share. If we don't share that, Gary, we share nothing. So we're just trying to spread the message. So honestly, the money's important. We need some money. We need to employ people to do things who are doing it currently out of the goodness of their hearts. And that won't be me or many of the spokesmen. We're just in for the cause, but we need people to help. But the main thing is just to spread the word that we have this common interest which transcends anything that individual political parties might be talking about.
It's good to see that you're working with Malcolm Mulholland. I got to meet him as he passed through
Yeah,
Whangarei.
he's a
Um,
great
uh,
guy, isn't he? Just a great
he's an
guy.
incredible human.
Yeah,
We've got a whole frontline episode devoted to him and the cause he was working on. An incredible story, his own personal story, his wife's story, and then his very selfless work for really now it's been years to try to bolster up the public healthcare system. And he delivered, I forget how many, but it might have been 90,000 signatures
yeah.
to Parliament,
I
asking
think it
them
was the
to
longest, the
take.
longest one ever. The longest one ever.
And then Dr. Gowler, and I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing his name right, but he's an
Yep,
intensive care doctor. Used to work at Middlemore, I believe, and
yep.
a good guy. I've read some of his work in the papers and been incredibly impressed at the insight he brings. So people like that are Dr. Rawiri Jensen. You're getting amazing leaders behind you in this organization. Um, I shouldn't say behind you because you're obviously one part of that. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I just wish you every success. Like I hope that this goes well. I hope the media picks it up and runs with it, and hopefully you'll get some time with all the different um, national candidates uh, I don't mean national party, I mean nationwide, to talk about this. And I wonder if you set up even sort of a debate forum or format for discussing healthcare policy and politics. I think
Yeah,
there's a
that's
lot of New Zealand that feels like they've got a dog in this fight and they have a stake in whether our public healthcare system is fit for purpose or not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we have some great people involved now. There are very few people who are involved in the health system, private or public, who would argue that we would not benefit from having a much stronger focus on our public health system, what it does, what it's capable of doing, how it contributes to our communities, and the difficulties of having a more privatized system. There are not many people who would argue against us. So, what we're doing, I think, is just trying to give a voice to what all of us feel that we've got a common interest here.
Well said. I hope your message gets through to our health minister because, as you know, he sent taxpayer dollars out into the from the public sector into the private. 16,000 cases got done out in private, and from what I understand, and from what he's messaged, his intent is to, if he can, privatize all of elective surgery. And I think if that happens, it's sort of a once in a generation thing because the same surgeons that work in and anesthetists and nurses that work in public
The
work
same
in
people.
private.
They're the
And
same
once
people.
you suck them out of the system, it's a story that doesn't end well for people coming along 5 or 10 years from now, hoping to
Yeah,
get adequate care.
couldn't agree more. And I think that Simeon Brown and others really don't, they're approaching the health system as if it were like any other commodity transaction system. And they're not understanding how it fits within a community, how it fits within a country, how it fits within a society. And they're treating it as a set of transactions. Once you do that, there's a sort of remorseless logic to what they're saying, but it leads to a very dark place. And I don't think they really understand that.
I think you're giving them a lot of credit and you're being very charitable.
I'm a nice
These
guy.
are professional commercial bankers in the case of the health minister and others. These are people with a lot of experience in business and in for-profit business, and you could argue that perhaps they don't know what they are doing, that they're ignorant to it, that they're innocent. Another less charitable, more cynical approach would be that they know exactly what they're doing and it's all going to plan and they're being very effective at it, which is to maximize shareholder value, maximize corporate profits. And if that is their goal, then they're tremendously successful at it. The long-term repercussions notwithstanding.
Yeah,
All right, I
if
guess
that
time
is,
will tell how the next year goes.
yeah, I hope they're not evil. They might be.
Yeah, I don't know that you need to be evil to be completely corporate profit focused. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's a conversation for another day. Maybe with
Well,
a philosopher. Uh,
yeah. Thank
yeah.
you so much for your support on this, Gary. We really appreciate it.
No, I back what your group is doing 100%. Like you say, we all need and want, well, maybe not all, but virtually all of us, and all of the public wants and needs a good, strong public healthcare system. And
100%.
I hope that your work will help get us there. Thanks, Rob Campbell. We'll have you on again to talk about maybe in 6 or 12 months how successful your campaign was and how you got all of the major political parties to double down on a commitment to strong, robust, well-resourced
Yeah.
public health care.
I genuinely hope so, Gary, and thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah. See you around. Bye, Rob. Brings us to the end of another interesting show on the front line. Where will the next couple of years lead us? Hopefully, not down the path of sort of American style profiteering off of healthcare and patients' needs. Time will tell. Stay tuned for the next episode of The Front Line. Thanks for joining me, Gary Payenda, and keep the comments coming in. Yeah, see you around. Bye.